Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as Rishi Sunak positions the Conservative Party as anti-climate action, I'm going to discuss whether or not he's making a huge mistake. It's not just that he's abandoning a fight with Labour, which is popular with the public, but Sunak seems to be fighting a battle here which potentially splits his own party in two. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So Rishi Sunak is continuing to pursue policies which pull back from action to deal with the climate emergency. Being clear, he was already doing this anyway, but it was more like he was reining back on net zero commitments whilst insisting that he was still committed to net zero. Now it's almost like, oh, we're only committed to net zero under certain conditions. I discussed in a previous video how the Conservatives usually beat Labour in elections by promising to implement the same popular policies or policies with the same outcomes in a very different way, of course, and with lower taxes. That is mostly how the Tories win elections. But nobody's going to believe them about the lower taxes, and in any case, most voters want the public services more than tax cuts, even Conservative voters. But now Sunak is even refusing to promise the popular policies which Labour are championing. I saw in the papers today that Sunak's promising a carbon capture scheme to create 21,000 jobs. Now, this would be exactly the sort of policy to announce. It sounds like a good move. If it weren't for the fact that the main message coming across to the public is rolling back our efforts to deal with unhealthy air and climate change. See, you go to the front page of the Daily Telegraph, that's got him promising a review of anti-car schemes, as he calls it, as he says he's on the side of motorists. Now, the thing is, everyone knows what that means. It means he's going to look at abolishing schemes which promote the use of cleaner forms of transport. He said he wanted to support people to use their cars. Now, the BBC is also reporting prominently the news that Sunak is targeting low traffic neighbourhoods. In fact, they've made the point that the government has already pulled funding for them already on the quiet, but they're now sort of explicitly attacking them. And that is what people are mostly reading today. Not very much about the job creations for a scheme which might actually be popular. Not that I'd believe Sunak is serious about any job creation scheme. He hasn't been for years. Why should he suddenly change now? I mean, let's look at what public attitudes towards the climate change emergency appear to be. So on the issue of whether the country thinks that climate change is over-exaggerated, as almost all of the mainstream media are trying to claim, 66% think, no, it's not over-exaggerated, with only 26% falling for the propaganda. Even for Conservative voters, who are the most susceptible to the Tory client media, 48% don't think the issue is over-exaggerated, to 45% who think it is. Now, that sounds very balanced, doesn't it? But therein lies the problem for Sunak. There are two issues with this result for him. The first is you have to ask what your target voters think. There are millions of voters who can be relied upon to vote Tory no matter what Sunak does. We sort of know that. They're going to get millions and millions of votes, and it really doesn't matter what state the country's in, what state the government's in, doesn't matter what the policies are. They're just going to turn up and vote Tory. But he needs to carefully select the target voters, the swing voters, in the key constituencies. Now, if you think about voters who are prepared to vote Conservative but can't be relied upon to do so, they might stay at home, they might vote for someone else. Which group are they more likely to be in? They're always more likely to be on the side of the majority of the country, which means that the Tories' target voters almost certainly, by and large, think that climate change is not being exaggerated. Of course, Sunak can always commission his own targeted polling to find out for certain, but I'll eat my hat if that is not the case. His second problem is that these attitudes are not evenly distributed around the country. The Tories are trying to play on the fears of the costs of climate action after their dishonest Uxbridge campaign, but this works better in the red wall areas where deprivation levels are higher, so there people will think, oh, well, I can't afford an extra charge to drive my car. But in the blue wall, not only are their voters less concerned about extra costs if it's to deal with something important, but they do tend to prioritise climate issues more highly. So what Sunak is doing here is he's creating another red wall, blue wall split on a policy issue. Because unless I'm missing something, this would appear to be an act of utter madness. Sunak is skating uphill in trying to retain the red wall. They don't warm to Sunak personally. They're suffering very badly from his policies. The culture wars are only working on so many of them. Like a year ago, you would think Labour are going to retake almost all of the red wall seats back, but there'll be a few that'll probably stay Conservative because they've been tending that way for years anyway. Now it's hard to see Sunak retaining a single red wall seat after the election. If the Tories are prioritising the winnable seats for the next election, their focus should be much more on the so-called blue wall. The blue wall wants robust environmental policies. This appears to be a quite insane move. He's allowing Labour to stand strong on their own environmental offers without seemingly any challenge at all. This is a proper defeat from the jaws of victory moment. After the Uxbridge result, you would think the Tories did brilliantly in those by-elections and Labour did disastrously. Sunak managed to paint it as a success, and Labour went into uncharacteristic meltdown. Couldn't believe what I was watching. Labour are acting as if they'd been getting everything wrong and they had to about face on everything, and over the last week they've done a fair bit of that. And the Tories presented the whole thing as a win, even though they lost 2 safe seats and came perilously close to losing all 3 by-elections. And yet it is Labour who gained in the polls last week across multiple pollsters. You can't say for certain why, because these things go up and down. You can't just point to one thing. But Sunak's immediate tilt away from climate action policies, I will tell you, is never popular in any credible poll. You know, we can look at a few others. How is the UK government handling climate change? 46% saying not enough, 22% saying too much, 14% happy with the balance. Now, again, for Conservative voters, there are 34% thinking they're doing too much to 32% thinking they're not doing enough. Now, again, a nice even split. Technical majority thinking the party does too much. So you could think, well, maybe there's method in this push away from climate action policies. But again, you have to ask yourself how the two types of voter feel. Because there are the reliable voters, the ones that are just going to vote anyway. There's the unreliable Tory voters, the ones that will only vote Tory under certain conditions. It's the reliable Tory voters who are almost certainly against the climate action, but they will still vote Tory if the Conservatives back climate action policies, because they will think to themselves, well, it'll be less severe than Labour's, and they'll be right. So that is still the better of the two options for them. It's or they think it is anyway. We'll see how they think in a few years' time when the climate emergency hits them. But it's the voters who are not afraid of a Labour government who are much more likely to be on the side of, well, the government's not doing enough. This is Sunak trying to appeal to one flank of his party, and it is not the one where most voters are. The ones where most voters are around the centre, that ultimately determines who wins elections. And it seems to me that Sunak is taking this line, not because any great strategy has advised him of this, but because the anti-net zero crowd have hijacked the ULEZ issue, which had nothing to do with environmental policy, and bent it to their own purpose. But it is out of kilter with the public. Ed Miliband, Labour's shadow energy minister, is writing again this weekend about how Labour are going to use dealing with the climate emergency as a way of beating the cost of living crisis, because that's what matters to people. And this is also a much easier argument to make than the Tories' counter-argument that net zero will make you poorer, because that's what the right wing keep telling us. Net zero will make us poorer and colder. But what actually made people poorer and colder over the last year or so? Our reliance on fossil fuels. It was widely reported that the cost of renewable energy did not increase. The reason the bills doubled is it was the higher cost of gas which did it. As for attacking Labour for their policies regarding North Sea gas, that can only fool so many people. It's the Conservatives in power now. It was the Conservatives in power last year. If North Sea gas is our saviour, why wasn't it? Why did our bill still double? And also, Labour can show, often when Labour have been out of power for so long and they're trying to demonstrate something, it's like hypothetical. There's a certain act of faith on the part of voters. But Labour can point to how Biden's America is leading the way on job creation, going hand in hand with tackling the climate emergency. It's not hypothetical. There are actual results across the Atlantic. And I go back to that front page of the Sunday Times, which talks about job creation through carbon capture. Now, I don't know if there's a real plan for this or if it's just a policy announcement to sound good. Carbon capture is tricky. But note that even Sunak is linking job creation with climate action. Where's his job creation with his pro-car focus? How is he presenting that in terms of the cost of living crisis? Because that is what people care about, their cost of living. If Sunak goes on a campaign to dismantle existing clean air projects or to block the ones that are still in the pipeline. How does that help him in the election? Because people already live with those schemes and they know that they don't contribute to their cost of living problems. Even the ULEZ argument only worked because they targeted voters who hadn't experienced it yet. As soon as they do, they'll see that actually it is not affecting the vast majority of them. And for some of those it does affect, there's funding to help them avoid it. Not enough, that's all. But Labour are promising to boost that funding as well. It really is very difficult to see where the Tories go with this one. I don't know if this is barking up the wrong tree or just a catastrophically bad idea. I know it's a mistake. But just to finish off, let us discuss how it could go really badly wrong for Sunak. From a Tory point of view, let us imagine their worst case scenario. So let us say that over the course of the summer, the polls turn against them on this issue as they are seen to be not taking climate change seriously at a time of year when traditionally climate change comes to the fore in the news. MPs in the blue wall rebel against Sunak because he's now making their already vulnerable seats even harder to fight, because voters in those seats want the climate change action. Sunak is unable to U-turn, because that would mean pissing off the political vandals in the party who will fight tooth and nail to retain any concessions made towards them. It's like you can have them chunter if you don't do what they say. As soon as you do what they say, yeah, there's no turning back. It is a realistic possibility, not certain, not saying certain, but it is a realistic possibility that this goes very badly wrong for Sunak in the polls and that Sunak will completely fracture his party with it. He may hope that the moderate wing of the party keeps quiet for the sake of party unity, as they did over Brexit, ahead of the general election. But it remains to be seen if this will be the case if the polling suggests that these anti-climate policies are meeting with fierce resistance from their voters. Because the thing about Brexit is a lot of those Tory MPs did not feel that their seats were threatened by Brexit. But they will feel that they're threatened by this. Now, how badly this goes wrong for Sunak will, of course, be partly down to how Sunak presents his messaging, which has not been effective so far, and partly it'll be down to how Labour present theirs. They need to stop having their little meltdown. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.